A very warm welcome to the day 3 of 10th edition of Pune International Literary Festival 2022. We now begin the most fascinating session on the trail of existential proof. We like to welcome our guest, Shivani Singh. Shivani has written many novels. She's written and directed 2 plays. She's a trained yoga instructor and has masters in philosophy from Delhi University. Sharmishta Mohanty. Sharmishta Mohanty is the author of many works of fictions. She is also the founder editor of the online literature journal Almost Island. Lalitha Suhasini. Lalitha Suhasini is an independent journalist and teaches journalism at Flame University. This conversation will be led by Lalitha Suhasini, and I now request her to begin this interesting session. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hi Sharmishta. It's an absolute
Hi.
pleasure to have you talk to us, and I was really keen on understanding your when I read Extinctions. Like I mentioned to you, it's really eloquent, moving, and if you can begin with reading from Extinctions,
Thank you.
I'll begin the session.
Okay. So I will read one brief section. The book is in short sections which are not related in any narrative way, as Lalita knows, and they each have a title. I'll read one short section and one slightly longer one. Stairs. From the main door, past the old hat stand with its shining mirror, the stairs went all the way to the upper floor. A grandfather in his dhoti went up slowly when he came home from his walk. The stairs were grey cement with a tall window at the landing halfway where the light came in. A daughter ran down joy to meet her father. A father climbed pain. Servants walked up exhaustion. A wife climbed what should be. These stairs allowed the body time for anticipation to grow, to conceal disappointment, to prepare for sharp encounters, to slow down after an unexpected defeat. The stairs were neither inside nor outside, a place where the world had been left behind or not yet begun. Her daughter climbed up devastation in her snow boots from another country, slow and heavy. A father was brought down as a dead body covered with flowers. The men in the family carried the stretcher and maneuvered it at the halfway landing so they could turn at the right angle. The banister had been grasped 1,000 times. It was down these stairs that people in the family came when they were leaving for distant worlds, for the stars, traveling through the darkness of the universe. It was up these stairs that they came when they returned to a home transformed by their own being away, the grandparents waiting for them on the final step, as if unchanged, with their natural calm, the sunlight behind them. This one is called Nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Not the unbounded sky. Nothing, not the 7.5 acres of land with its fruit and flowering trees each season on which she lives. Not the devotion of the Buddhist monks from Cambodia and Thailand who come for the day to visit the great caves and prostrate themselves on their undulating stone floor. Not the sudden, unseasonal March thunderstorms and rain and hailstones that last a week and destroy the wheat and leave the farmers bereft. Nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Not the great Buddha in the caves next door. For what can stone do or say or impart or move? Nothing. Not her own face, hammered and chiseled by her loss as if into its original form. No longer the flabbiness that comes from having received too much love, the stout body shaped and nimble now, from the comfort and security of that love suddenly taken away. The passage to beauty, not slow, but sharp and cleaving. To others, something. To her, nothing. Nothing. Not the village women who squat and withstand and tend the land on which these cottages have sat for 21 years, making a sprawling hotel and retreat for scholars, artists, people of faith, monks, and seekers. Not the red vented bulbuls which come back every twilight to sleep in the tree near the fence, returning when there is barely any light left in the sky, so that the bright red on their bodies cannot be separated from the darkness. And almost nothing is what she eats at each meal, almost a year after his death. Only 3 spoons of rice and dal, and perhaps some vegetables. Not even rotis, which no longer go down her throat. Eats this almost nothing as she works at her desk doing accounts and overseeing the whiteness of the towels, the food being cooked in the enormous kitchen, the pruning of the rose bushes. Nothing, nothing. Not the nearby small town of ruined medieval mausoleums and graves, where Sufis, some of them from Arabia, are buried by the hundreds, now become nothing the way they wanted. Not the lame hunchback in white who prays at one particular grave each day at sunset and walks slowly backwards till the grave has vanished out of his sight in time with the light. Not the returning visitor who comes with condolence and compassion, and her tears come without a struggle to stop them as she talks to this visitor, and she does not raise a hand to wipe away the wetness. There is no need. I am alone, 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 and nothing, she says. Not the Buddha, nor Shiva, nor Durga in the caves across the fence from her land, watching over the centuries, their faces always twice lit by that imperceptible smile on the face and by fragments of the flexible sunlight that have bent and twisted inside according to the season. Both are sources of light that have never paled, even though time has often caused a crack through the head, destroyed a large hand, raised in the Abhay Mudra, fear not, fear not, leaving the arm as a stump or smashed a breast. The face has remained lit, a lamp in a windless place, changing nothing, 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 nothing. Nothing, for no hillside exploded and cracked over years, nor its carving by thousands of craftsmen through the centuries, neither the multitudes of faiths, neither faith nor its defiance, not the Buddha who worked like a laborer at suffering, his hammer rising and falling in comprehension. Nothing can bring to her even a wisp of solace. Nothing, 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 nothing. Not the order of the days and seasons that forever return and never falter. And what has been achieved turns into failure, becomes nothing, so that people have to begin all over again. What has already been changes into what is likely to become, so that once again the hillside must be exploded, the sky pulled in from above. Until then, perhaps, nothing, 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 nothing.
Thank you, Sharmishta. That was beautiful. Hi, Shamsha. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I think there's no better day than a Sunday to sort of get into, poetry, take in all this, um, the lyrical words that poetry manages, the magic that poetry actually manages to bring into our lives. And for someone who's dealt with non-fiction, all through her life, in her career at least, what what do you think this what do you think fiction does to non-fiction? Does it smooth out the edges? Because the prose poetry, which Extinctions has and which your other works include, they have a lot of non-fiction. We can see those images. They're so visual and they're so real, like this father's body being carried with flowers all over him. Is Does fiction sort of soften the blow, you think?
Lalita, I think that actually non-fiction and fiction are two totally different things, because fiction may include non-fiction. As you know, in Extinctions, I have a lot of factual things. I
Yes.
have histories, right? But in the writing of it, what happens is, in fiction or poetry, the imagination is the primary element. So even in stairs, where it's a description and it may seem factual, but it's actually my imagination which is putting those images together in a certain way and buttressing them against one another. There are juxtapositions, there are ways of even writing a sentence which may not be conventional, which are hopefully leading to the entire emotional impact that the piece is going to have. And by not conventional a sentence, I mean, say, take a sentence like a home changed by their own going away. Now, that's a very awkward construction. If you were to be in a writing class, people would tell you not to use that. But I have chosen to use that instead of by their own traveling or by their travels, because that's too cliched. It will not bring about the kind of emotion that I seek to bring about, or more precisely, that I feel inside me when I write the piece. So I think nonfiction and fiction are completely different things. They're both extremely important, but they really are not related to each other. Fiction can gather a little nonfiction in terms of facts, which, as you're right, I've done in much of my work, because I like doing that. I like bringing in facts and creating poetry out of the facts themselves.
Right. Right. So let's put it this way. Maybe realism and myth, right? When they come together, is that is that something that you feel has worked well for the form, or as an artist, is it something that you feel the need to bring in, or is that something that just happens? If you can take us through the process of writing.
I think it's actually it's a merging of the two, it's a need because I've always written in this way. I've hardly done any conventional narratives except for one book of mine many years ago. It's a need, and in a way it's also a belief, because I don't believe anymore in the realist narrative tradition. And I think people don't realize that that is just one literary tradition. It's not the only one. People use it today as the only one. It is Western European, it has been handed down to us in the colonial period. And we've taken it, wholesale. So we have to also look at our own traditions of legends and myths and storytelling. We have to look at traditions from other countries which have different ways of telling a story. But we somehow don't want to go there because I think we're afraid, and we're afraid of being called regressive or superstitious. But no, we have to bring it all forward and make it contemporary for ourselves. Going back to myth and legend does not mean regressive. We are, then putting down the great civilization that we are, with all its faults. I mean, of course, we, have many faults in this civilization, as we all know. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So you take what is great and beautiful and you work with that. I'm really, actually, to be honest with you, just plain bored with realist narrative. I mean, I never read it because I just find it does not delve deep enough into the human condition. And it's like taking a structure and hanging your thoughts on it. Most people who use it have not thought through things. I know it sounds very critical, but I can only be honest. So,
No, you're right about that. There are certain tropes that exist, and like you said, um, these writers are meant to fall within that structure, and there is really no courage in, or whatever. Maybe they're not able to break away from this format because it's so easy to follow. But if for those in the audience who are familiar with extinctions or even unfamiliar, could you tell us a little bit about extinctions? How is it that you thought about it and the writing of extinctions?
okay, so for many years now, I've just been watching all the things in our civilization which are just disappearing. No one, perhaps people do, but I don't know. No one seems to notice their disappearance. We don't have a museum culture, which in a way is not a bad thing. So these things are not in museums, but they used to be very living things that all of us all over the country used or did every day. At least some of us at a certain age. I don't know about young people in their 20s now, what their a few decades have been. So I said I want to write uh, about these things and what they evoke in me today, what they evoked in me then. And so I began writing the book. And most of my experiences are from Bengal, very consciously because I'm Bengali and I grew up in Calcutta. And also, I didn't want this book to become a compendium or an encyclopedia of things that are disappearing, because in every area of the country, there are many, many things disappearing. But I wanted to write only about things that I had experienced myself. And only then would my writing be genuine. I could write about, say, the Bhuta tradition disappearing, which I really admire, but, I'm not from Mangalore. It's just knowledge in the head, but I don't feel it in my body and my being. So that's really the reason why I wrote it. And obviously it couldn't have a narrative. I mean, what narrative would it have? It creates its own narrative, I hope, from all the things that I'm talking about. And these things, as I say, or I think my publisher says at the back of the book, are not just objects, they are emotions, they are gestures. It's almost like a whole canvas of things that is going.
Right. So, in the process of writing this, Sharmishta, did you find any answers or as to why this is happening, or some sort of a closure, or is did it sort of was it some sort of a release in some way?
I don't think I found a closure. I think it's very open ended, and I think there is lamentation there in my feelings. At the same time, I'm very clear, and I hope that the book is not nostalgic. Nostalgia is not something we need. We need something much more constructive than nostalgia. So we need to say, um, not necessarily rush to preserve things, but the spirit behind those things. And the example I would use is something I've not written about in Extinctions, but which is there in my other work. Say we're in Maharashtra, and say the Ellora Caves. Now, I have visited the Ellora Caves maybe about 10 times, and I take from them an energy. Let's not get into the religious aspect of it, okay? I take from them their energy, their incredible artistic achievement, the work. And I want to take that kind of energy and belief and achievement forward, because my point is we had it. We had it over centuries in everything. Why can't we bring that energy back now? Why are we just a pale imitation of what the West is? I mean, this is also connected, as you know, Lalita, with uh, what kind of state there is, what kind of economy, where all of that. I mean, it's not separated from that. So
Right. But also, like you said, it is an imitation, not just in fiction, but in all kinds of writing, like even review writing. I know that there are people who look to the West for stylistic guidelines, and they write in a certain manner. And so, my question, Sharmishta, to you is: so when you began writing, was it a different style, and or did you break form right from the beginning? Did you say that I don't want to look to the West, and I want to do this on my own? As in, was that thought there right from the start?
it was very much there. I studied at a place in the US called the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I had a very great teacher who was an African American and who really encouraged me to explore other forms. I also had a classmate who was writing a novel which was non narrative. And I was really inspired by her. And I said to myself that the very first thing I write, I don't want it to be a narrative. Let me also make it clear, when I'm saying non Western, I'm just saying it's the mainstream Western mode. Obviously, there are alternate writers. There are writers in Latin America and Eastern Europe who've used other forms. So, yes, it was very much on my mind right from the beginning. And that doesn't seem to have changed.
Right. And to go back to something that you said about Extinctions, no, it doesn't evoke a sense of nostalgia at all. In fact, when I was reading it, what I felt was that there is an urgency to revive things that we may have lost or are on the verge of losing. So, did you hear some of this sort of feedback from, say, others who've read Extinctions? What did your
I think many people at readings, especially, I'm setting aside reviews for the time being because those are written by literary people like ourselves or quote unquote intellectuals, etc. But at readings, I have had a lot of people who have nothing to do with literature, and that's how it should be because one doesn't write for writers, one writes for everybody. Coming up and saying to me that they feel very connected to the book and as if they feel I am speaking what is inside them. That means a lot to me because I am sure many, many others feel this way. And, speaking of bringing things back, Lalita, if not objects, there are many things that we have that I feel we disregard. We say, okay, it's not needed or it takes time. But no, we can have those still, you know. I can give you a little example. I don't know if Shivani is here, if we have time or not.
No, we do have time. She hasn't joined us, and
Okay,
please,
so
give us-
so I'll just read a tiny, I mean, it's a one para,
it's
which you will understand why what I'm saying. So this is again uses some Bengali words, but I'm explaining them. It's called truth. When someone left, we said, Esho, come again. And they said, Ashti, I will return. A breath path was made between one person and another, or rather, the breath path was acknowledged because it was already there. It was there with a recent acquaintance or with a brother, even with someone who did not evoke tenderness. To say what you did not mean was necessary to keep the breath paths open. When a guest said they were leaving, you asked them to stay a little while longer, even if you didn't really want them to stay. What the heart felt and what the ritual asked for were not the same. In that distance, there was infinite space for everyone.
that was beautiful.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask maybe slightly technical questions, which fascinate me again because I'm coming from a place of nonfiction, which has structure and like journalism, it had a headline, strapline, a fixed lead, and so on and so forth. Um, so when do you know that this piece of poetry is done? When do you know that it's finished?
That's a that's a very lovely question, actually, Lalita, because Giorgio Agamben, the great Italian philosopher, has written a whole book called The End of a Poem, in which he talks about how does a poet know when a poem is finished. Um, the answer is one doesn't really know, and I think for me, when I'm writing, there comes a point when, okay, I feel emotionally that I'm done, obviously, emotionally and intellectually somewhere. Uh, and I let it go. But the thing is, I may return to it and I may edit and I may cut back or write a bit more, as the case may be. For a whole book, and that's true of any book I write, I would say that I like to use the example of, it's like a fire. You burn it down to ashes, and you have nothing more inside you to say or to write. And that's where the end is. And of course, after it's published, you're going to look at it and say, oh no, I could have written that better, or that line was a bit too much. At least I do that all the time. But that's inevitable, I think, with every writer who is genuine and who, is can be self-critical.
Right. And there is always talk about how there poetry, most people are just like, say, jazz, for instance. They're somehow intimidated by poetry and they say, "Arey yaar, I don't know if I can understand all these things. It's intellectual." And so, how does, even at your readings, or how does one break that wall? How does that, how does that happen?
I don't really know. One is to open the mind a little bit and say that, look, it's not something, you don't have to understand it. Poetry is a little like music. You just
Exactly.
let
Feel it.
it enter you and feel it. And remember, that again, if I go back to tradition, the Gita is in verse. The Rig Veda is in verse. We are used to chanting at our pujas, the what we call in Bengal the Panchali, or that form of storytelling about the gods. Now, everyone's heard that. Everyone's gone through that. Whether you believe it, don't believe it, you're against it, is a, I'm not getting into that, okay? It's there in our tradition. So
Right.
why would poetry be such a frightening thing? I would agree that contemporary poetry can get a little obscure because we're not operating on common ground always, as the older texts. They're assuming a culture, a context. Right now, we're not always doing that. But in Extinctions, you can say, I am assuming a culture in a context. I mean, the book is not going to have the same impact, say, abroad, as it would for someone, a reader like you who's Indian and who knows, exactly, not even knows, who can feel what I'm talking about.
Right.
So just to be open in your mind, perhaps to come to readings where it's easier to absorb the incantatory qualities, the rhythms of verse, the music of it.
Right. So it's very interesting what you said about someone relating to the kind of poetry that you've written, because they also understand the context. But it also works similarly with, say, an international audience, right? Doesn't it? It would sort of make them want to look up this, say, Bhatyali, for instance, and see what is
I
the most.
suppose so. I suppose so. I mean, I do have a lot of people abroad, many of them poets, many of them perhaps not poets, who have read the book and who have read my earlier work and have responded. So I mean, I guess there's also something universal to it because one of my works is currently being translated into Spanish and it'll appear in Chile as well as in Argentina, which are very, very different cultures. So I was actually very taken aback when these offers came. But clearly, yes, you're right. I mean, you know, um, but somewhere when I'm talking about a miniature painting or when I'm saying a Sanskrit shlok, it's going
Right.
to, I mean, that's how literature is. It doesn't mean it has to only be read by your own culture, obviously, because we read all the world greats. It's just that extra pleasure of, your own people from your own country reading you who've gotten all the nuances, let's say. you know.
Right. And that's not even something that you are thinking about as a poet, are you? I mean, you are just
So
creating, and
I'm
uh,
not at all,
right.
not at all. That would be very destructive.
Yeah. So, what is it like to be in that space, Sharmishta? As in, do you, at when you are writing, can you take us through um, what the rituals are like when you're writing, as a writer's rituals?
Okay, let me give you an example. I have a section in this book called Kajol, which basically in Bengali is Kajal, right? And how Kajal used to be made at home using a certain thing called what we called a Kajol Lota, where you hold something above a flame with ghee and, the soot forms, right? So now I knew I wanted to write about that. And I had memories associated with it. I remembered my mother and grandmother making kajal. So I start with that, right? But the thing is, you can't just put down that as a memory, because then it's sentimental or it's nostalgic. And it's nothing that is worthy of, you have to make it worthy, right? And you have to change it somewhere in the writing. So it's like entering, I don't know, like walking on a path. It's unknown where your path is going to lead. So as you keep thinking about it and you're in that memory of the kajal being made, what happens is your grandmother comes in, your mother comes in, bringing with them their world and the context in which they lived. That begins to enter. So you start to draw a picture of an entire universe around that kajal, the person who worked in the house, her, I mean, all sorts of things come in. And when you work with all those things and you've gone forward completely with that, then you know that you've written what you wanted, hopefully, to write.
Right. What about the more sensory rituals that one, like an artist, does while writing? As in, do you shut yourself off from, say, other forms of writing and music, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to focus on writing? And what is that like?
I don't think that I really do that. I mean, I don't shut myself from other forms. I mean, whatever I may feel like listening to Kesar Bai, and I'll listen. And in fact, Kesar Bai I find very inspiring. Um, I don't know. I might go and see a piece of, I mean, theater, there isn't that much that's there to see, but I might go and see anything, or I have a lot of artist friends, so I may talk to them, or I may watch a movie. And all of that goes into my being as an artist. So I don't really shut myself off. What I may not do as much when I'm writing is I may not read as much as I do otherwise, because that part of the mind I'm trying to keep free, perhaps.
Right, right. There was a sound and poetry installation based on one of your works in the past, if I'm not wrong,
Right.
in Bombay,
In Kochi, yeah.
in Kochi, sorry, at the Biennale. Um, how did you get involved in it? As in, what was your um, contribution to it? Did you sort of direct the kind of sounds that should be used in it? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I did. It's a poem. I don't know if you've seen it physically yourself, but it's a poem, and I worked with the technical people basically to project it on a window as well as on the wall and the floor. So it was kind of like coming down all the way to the floor. And I worked on the sound also a lot on the recording. My husband is a sound and video artist, so I'm very familiar with that area. So I worked with him and a recordist on recording it the way I wanted to, reading it very, very at a very low volume, which brings a different kind of emotion. So there was a lot of work involved before getting it completely ready, and installing it. It was quite complex, actually.
Right,
So I don't think I'll ever do something like that again, because it's not my medium really, and it takes a lot of work which I'm not familiar with. It makes you feel a bit uneasy till it's all done.
right. And did you see um, people engaging with it differently? Do you remember anything from what those who saw the
I
installation?
think a lot of people responded, and it was a very different audience, right, Lalita? Because it was a much more random audience. Lakhs of people were walking through.
Yes.
And when you're a writer, especially a writer in English in this country, obviously the numbers are going to be far more limited. So I think what I felt very happy about was that I would have just anyone saying that, it was absolutely beautiful and we were very moved. And I may then ask them, what do you do? And they'd say, well, I'm a housewife, or somebody, not at all looking down on housewives at all. I'm just saying that it was not only impactful on people in the arts or people.
Right.
So lots of people came and told me that, which was very heartening. And there again, I think, it was poetry, and a lot of people responded to it simply because they were seeing just one poem projected and hearing it read. It's as if it was easier for them in
Right.
some way.
Right.
So,
Um, yeah. So yeah, I was just interested in, whether they're engaging with sound and text in a different way compared to, of course, when they're just reading.
probably because it's different than reading on a page. It's more for the for most people, I would say it's probably more engaging. They're looking at light and movement and sound, and so.
Right.
Lalita, should
Um,
we take questions from the audience, because I think Shivani is
yeah,
not coming?
I've
And
I've been looking at the time, so we've got 10 minutes for audience interaction. So I thought
okay,
maybe we can open
unless
it up for audience
unless you
questions.
had something else you wanted to ask, I don't want to cut you off.
No, we can sort of open this up. I think this is a question that the audience might also ask you, so it's fine. We can open it up. So before they come in, maybe I will ask you, Sharmishta, as in, because everyone keeps talking about um, print dying, right? And in this context, I mean about print journalism dying and all of that. And so, so is that something that comes up for discussion when you meet other poets, and about people not wanting to pick up a book of poetry, or is that something that ever comes up?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's afraid that literature itself may be dying. But then often you'll meet people who are just readers, and they pop up from anywhere, and then you're very pleasantly surprised. So I don't know, but definitely I think what is dying is attention span, and that's the reason. If anything, for literature dying, people do not have long attention spans. They have bite size, WhatsApp size attention spans, and people are distracted, and that's terrible for everybody. And it's as much the devices as us, because I can see myself getting distracted, and wanting to see, oh, I have some, let me see who's messaged me. It's a very kind of human reaction, right? So you just have to keep these things away and just say, no, I'm not going to give in. And I don't know. I mean, that's the only way. It's a problem of attention span, I think.
Right. So I'm going to check with. I'm just going to check.
Uh, Lalita, if there are no questions, I mean, we can also close it if you want.
I think we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we exit the studio? We'll do that.
I think so. I mean, no point waiting around, right? It's 12:20 almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Sharmishta. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been wonderful chatting with you. I'm
Thank you,
glad we got
Lalita.
this time.
It's been very nice to chat with you also. I liked your questions, and I hope we can stay in touch. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye bye.